In the US, many employers can fire people for almost any reason. That's not the case in Canada, but that doesn't mean you can't face consequences for what you say in the office or on the internet. Charlie Herrera Vacaflor, an employment law and HR senior consultant at Peninsula Canada, explains.
Charlie, welcome to the program. Let's talk political speech in the workplace. How is it protected compared to race, gender, religion?
That's a great question and something that we constantly clarify to our clients at Peninsula. Political speech is not specifically protected in all Canadian jurisdictions. For instance, the federal human rights legislation and Ontario's do not protect specifically political speech. However, many other provinces do. Now, what does this mean? Can I specifically and blatantly ban political speech from the workplace? No. What, as an employer, you can do is set specific guidelines of what is respectful political speech in the workplace and which instances will be considered possibly, something that is not respectful.
I think what we see of late is a lot of people seeing the consequences of something that they have said, and what we see is them being terminated from their job or fired. On what grounds could an employer terminate someone for political speech?
So at Peninsula, what we say to our clients is that no termination is risk-free. And therefore, these kind of decisions should be well thought. As I mentioned, political speech is protected and in some jurisdictions as a human rights protected characteristic. And therefore, depending on the circumstances, a termination could lead to a discrimination claim. Therefore, it is important that we always establish specific guidelines of what is accepted political speech, what is respectful to other employees, in how to have these kind of conversations, so that everyone operates with knowledge and understanding of what is the expected conduct. Termination,
if we look at a spectrum, is on one end. There are other things that could be done, other actions that employers can do. What else could they be looking at?
At the get-go, what we advise our clients is to have specific policies in place. These specific policies will usually determine what is the expected conduct and under which circumstances could discipline follow. Of course, as legislation and case law usually tells employers how to operate, is to always follow what is called a progressive discipline approach. So, of course, termination never being the first instance unless circumstances merit so. Usually you want to follow first a verbal warning, then a written warning, a final or second written warning, and then possibly a termination.
Okay. I want to talk about a lot of people work from home, but also the influence of technology.
Yeah.
A lot of people if they're working a 9 to 5, after 5 o'clock, they're living their lives. And I want to make a distinction, or is there a distinction between someone who is, using social media, talking about something that could be controversial at home, online, versus in the office?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that has come up a lot lately, given everything that has happened around certain political figures' expressions, So there's two approaches. The first approach is having, as I mentioned before, a workplace policy that tells employees what is the best practice conduct for their workplace. The second one is always to have a transparent and constant communication with your employees about how to go over specific situations. So in this year, it's been a hard year for Canadians because we had plenty of elections. We are coming out, or we're going through, turmoil of a relationship with our closest neighbor, and folks have they want to say something.
Have a lot to say.
Yeah, exactly. We're people. And so in that regard, it's always important for employers to say, before you want to say something, make sure if you really have to. If you really have to. And if you really have to, make sure that there are certain caveats or there are certain protections that are in place. Does your social media have your company affiliation? Is your like a specific name there? You know, those things, and then of course, let's try to moderate the way that we express ourselves. You know, hateful speech, you know, can always bring problems, not only for oneself, but also if you are having your company affiliation attached to that, it could bring reputational problems for the company. And that is where a workplace policy best addresses those kind of instances.
All right, I want to talk about some real life examples.
Yeah.
We asked the market research firm Advanced Symbolics Inc., which uses artificial intelligence technology known as Poly, to find out what topics people are afraid to talk about in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the number one topic came up as Charlie Kirk. Not Charlie you, but Charlie Kirk, which for people who don't know, a right-wing commentator who was killed in Utah on campus last month. And what they found was that any conversation around Charlie Kirk quickly escalated into heated arguments or accusations, and there was a palpable sense that any comment could be misrepresented or weaponized by colleagues with opposing views. With this specific example, do people need to be afraid of what they say about him?
You know, that statement in itself is very dangerous. When people live with fear about what their thoughts are and their expressions, it seems like there are many things that have gone wrong before. Now we're trying to figure out how to address them. What I've said before in part of the publications that we do is that both employees and employers are going through a lot of changes, and the velocity of these changes is like an unprecedented pace. Legislation is coming up, new things are happening, you know, there's tension growing, and then people just react. And in this reaction is where, you know, the problems, the tension comes, and the fear ensues, both for the employee and the employer. In these situations, I acknowledge that there is a lot of, you know, tension and just uncertainty about how to manage these situations. But I think the key one is empathy. How is my expression going to be received by the other person? And if another person were to say something that I completely disagree with, how will I receive that? And I think that is one of the key messages that all employers should be putting out there is, you know, have more empathy in the way that you express yourself, because however you may be hurting other people, you may also be subject to that. And if we don't do that, the problem is that situations will escalate. And, you know, may that never happen, that, you know, we have violence in the workplace. One of the key things that we tell all our employers, our clients, is that they have an obligation to have a respectful work environment. That is an actual legal obligation. And so if employers cannot guarantee that, you know, employees can have a good resource to go against their businesses. So this also clarifies why employers also feel very tense.
Can you give us a sense of what, in this moment, you described the sort of the climate that we're in. What are you hearing and seeing from employers and employees about sort of those conversations right now? Is it turning, you know, sometimes it feels like on social media what we see is sort of a witch hunt sometimes when someone says something that may be deemed, you know, on one side of the spectrum, on the political speech spectrum, as controversial. It turns into a witch hunt to find their employer as a way to show them that they can't say that. I am curious, have you dealt with employers and employees who are having to navigate, you know, okay, yes, this was said, but legally, what are the ramifications?
So, great question. Yes, indeed, many of our clients have reached out about this specific issue. What we first see is that employers are definitely tense. They are fearful because they see that their employees, many of them, have their affiliation in their social media. So they are fearful. They are fearful that their companies are going to be subject to the witch hunt. So there is a whole context that just doesn't allow for there to be a moment of, cooling off period. Everybody's reacting. What we do tell our employers, and we prepare them for success, is make sure that you have your policies in place, that you have communicated and been transparent with your employees about how to handle these situations, and that, when we know, for instance, when we know that there is a conflict in the Middle East, and that people will talk about this, we tell them, we preempt this by saying, please refrain from using hateful words, refrain from using hateful expressions or expressions that you wouldn't like to be told to yourself. These kind of communications and transparency are the best way to just try to find a path forward. It's not going to be the end solution. Things will have to be tweaked. This is not something that, it's said once and never touched again.
Can I get some clarification as to what would be deemed a hateful comment?
Well, like as you mentioned with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I think that comments that try to contextualize something that our criminal code says that it's wrong to do is definitely something that will create some hostility or may create some hostility
Saying
in the
that
workplace.
whether he deserved to die or something like that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So those kind of things, I would say it's better to, have them somewhere else, in a dinner conversation, at a pub or other, in a context that is not in a place where you are going to have repeated iterations with the people that you have to work with.
I want to get a better understanding from the employee side of things. We talk about sort of the witch hunt. We talk about the pressure that employers, have to put out a statement. If an employee is fired for posting something offensive about Charlie Kirk or Israel and Palestine, what recourse does the employee have to challenge their termination? Sometimes it may seem that employers are being quick because they have to respond we're in a time and age where if you don't see a response or someone has been fired from their job, then something is not being done. But on the employee side, is there something that they can do?
We're very careful at Peninsula to always tell our employers, your employee has rights. Your employee has guarantees that you need to respect. Freedom of speech is specifically one of them. And in certain jurisdictions, as I mentioned before, political speech is specifically protected. So that means that operating through termination or unreasonable disciplinary action can warrant you a human rights claim. What we do tell our clients to communicate with their employees is how to manage this in a situation that allows them to have the freedom, but also makes them aware that their speech and the way that they voice it can be put under scrutiny.
It's very clear that there are blurred lines.
Yes.
Sometimes it's very clear as to what is political speech and what could be considered hateful, but to what extent is speech in the eye of the beholder? I want to give you an example. The phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, might be offensive to some people, but not to others. How do employers navigate the nuance of that?
So everybody is entitled to a specific view on a specific tension, right? And when we're talking about war, that will always have gray areas. The specific way is to ensure that the workplace as a whole is able to move forward, no matter how it's being said, no matter what is being said. Because what can be offensive to somebody may not be offensive to others, and vice versa. So the issue here is how can we move together in a way that people don't separate, people don't create violence, people don't create tension. I always say that with the most clear-cut ways when we're talking about the LGBTQ plus community. Something like a pronoun means everything for that community, because it's talking about not only their identity, but the way that they express themselves. And having a comment about that may be like something in passing for many folks, but for that community, it's everything. And not being respectful and about that, it's literally negating their existence. So expressions from the river to the sea may mean, something totally rightful and champion for some, but for the other ones, has to do with their existence as well.
Charlie, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate it. Some good food for thought for employees and employers.
Thank you for having me.